Hello Legionnaires, this is Maxial from Legion Myth, and today I'm going to touch on a sensitive subject of speciesism in fantasy role-playing games. First of all, let me start out by saying that I'm going to try and stay away from the terms race and racism as much as possible. What I'm going to talk about in this segment is in regard to fantasy genre species and speciesism. To be very clear, racism is what we know and despise in today's world, where people are judged and prejudged based on nothing more than physical characteristic, place of origin, and so forth. In fantasy terms, racism is intra-species prejudice, such as Hill Dwarf versus Mountain Dwarf, High Elf versus Dark Elf, and Tall Fellow versus Harefoot. Speciesism is inter-species prejudice, such as Elf, Orc versus Elf, Dwarf versus Gnome, and Romulan versus Klingon. So, the lesson for today is that demi-humans are not humans. Okay? Let's get that very clear, at least in the traditional Dungeons & Dragons, and, we'll say it's 70s and 80s, the original fantasy tropes. Stop thinking of and treating demi-human races as merely humans with stat bonuses or pointed ears. In traditional fantasy, and specifically D&D and AD&D, at least before 3rd edition, demi-humans are the embodiment or personification of stereotypes. Elves, dwarves, humans, and so on are more than just biologically different. They are mentally, physically, and spiritually different. Humans in fantasy are as diverse in looks, thoughts, hopes, dreams, education, family, origin, ethnicities, so on and so forth, as we are on modern Earth. If it can be dreamed, a human will dream it and probably attempt it. Demi-humans, on the other hand, are living, personified stereotypes. Understand the topic of differing species in a fantasy setting is more than just cultural or physical. It's what I would consider immutable, instinctual, genetic, or spiritual, hard-coded in the DNA of the species or endowed by a deity, created in his image, so to speak, depending on the philosophical bent of your campaign world. Dogs and cats are mammals that hunt for food, have a coat of fur, have forms of communication, and make wonderful pets. However, genetically, they're quite different. Dogs and cats may say some of the same things. I'm hungry, don't touch me, or you're the best. But they speak different languages, have different core desires, and live completely different lives in nature. Dogs and cats are as alien to each other as elves and dwarves. Maybe a better example moving forward would be lions and cheetahs, but that doesn't sound as good as, or make as good as a visual, so I'm sticking with cats and dogs. An orc isn't just a brutish, uneducated human from the Badlands, nor is an elf just a lithe, hippie human who lives in the woods. Orcs and elves are completely different species, with completely different genetic makeups. Orcs and elves are literally alien to each other. Let's just look at a dwarf for a moment. At a dwarf's core is a being who has a connection to the rock and stone that form the foundation of the planet. They are shapers of the rock and stone with a penchant for engineering, mining, and meticulous craftsmanship. While it may be true that not all dwarves live in mountains, not all dwarves are craftsmen. All dwarves do prefer to live with the closest connection to stone and mineral as possible. Any dwarf who doesn't desire this connection is, it's not a dwarf. Now let's look at elves. Elves don't just have a tendency to live in forests and seas and jungles and so on. Elves are one with the natural landscape of the world. While dwarves show strength and order through the shaping of stone, elves live organically in a symbiotic relationship with their natural habitat. The core of an elf is in tune with nature in a manner that dwarves and even humans find alien, can never truly understand. An example of a 21st century elf would be a live and let live libertarian who exists in harmony with nature, a so-called hippie who lives in an adobe hut or log cabin. This elf would travel the world as much as possible, on foot, bicycle, horseback, and, when necessary, via public transportation. This elf would hate human urban sprawl, and would find the human desire to pave over the world, build skyscrapers, and design muscle cars completely alien and irrational. Irrational. The actions of an unenlightened, can't talk, species. The elf would consider humans as uneducated and uncivilized buffoons due to our inability to harmonize with nature. Even if the elf understands what it means to be a human intellectually, he cannot truly grasp those human behaviors that are out of sync with the core, genetic, or spiritual makeup of the elf. Just as a human can never truly understand or change what it means to be a great ape. Dwarves and elves, on the whole, may be inherently good and desire world peace and tranquility, but the core being of who they are, and thus their ways of achieving said tranquility, are not only different, but truly alien to each other. Dwarves have a strong work ethic. Elves will get to it when it's convenient. Elves believe happiness is the key to a good life. Dwarves believe a good life is being useful and productive. Dwarves believe life should be organized, engineered, planned. Elves are haphazard and spontaneous, wanting to experience life for the individual self. An elf's word is as good as it's convenient. A dwarf's word will transcend generations. These are stereotypes that go beyond mere upbringing and tradition. These are core, instinctual, genetic, or spiritual traits. A dwarf that has no connection to the earth and stone is no true dwarf. An elf that shuns a good life is no true elf. Yes, I used an improper debate technique, the no true Scotsman, but it's apropos here. It fits. It is correct. This doesn't mean that dwarves and elves must hate each other. No. It means that on a base core level, they simply don't get each other. Dwarves are too serious, dour, and orderly for elves, while elves are too flippant and nonchalant. A dwarf is like a boulder rolling down a hill. Once his mind is put to something, it will take something quite formidable to change his direction. An elf, on the other hand, is like a leaf on the wind. He'll do whatever is expeditious at the time. The dwarf may not feel comfortable around elves and may even make an effort to stay away from them. None of this means he must attack or actively work against an elf. To be very clear, it is as simple as that. Let's not dwell on two sides of the same coin. Let's change the currency. First of all, may not agree with my points, but if you find the topic thought-provoking and interesting, please subscribe to this channel. Smash that bell icon. It really does help us out immensely. Now let's talk about the orc. Orc are aggressive humanoids who band together to hunt and raid. They believe that to survive, they must expand their territory. Orcs view aggression as the natural order and that other races are inferior to them. The greatest challenge is the test of battle, and they value territory above all else. Let me repeat this. Orcs believe that to survive, they must expand their territory. This isn't a nice idea. This is survival. Other species and kingdoms are not going to tolerate the orcs expanding into their territories, raiding food stores and murdering its people to slake the orc's desire to show strength. The orc, on the other hand, on a core, genetic, and spiritual level, cannot help but to continue to try expanding. Expansion validates strength. It is simply who they are. It's like trying to stop a cat from chasing a string or a male dog from lifting its leg to pee. Negotiation between dwarves and orcs is going to be improbable at best. Why? Because the dwarves are as stern and unbending as the stone they work, while the orcs have an instinctual drive, an innate need to expand, and believe the ensuing conflict is part of the natural order. Survival of the fittest, kill or be killed. It's not a lack of education on the part of either species that causes them to be obstinate in the eyes of humans. It's that they cannot change their core genetic or deity-imbued traits of who they are. Dwarves and orcs may use the same words, but they speak a different language. Cats. Dogs. On the other hand, due to the open-minded nature of humans, it's easier for us humans to understand both sides. As such, in many fantasy settings, while humans may have their flaws, one thing they bring to the table is the ability to see past the differences in order to broker peace and create a bridge to understanding with or between demi-human races, species. I've watched a bunch of videos that tap dance around the topic of speciesism in role-playing games, but none were as direct as the one created by How to Be a Great Game Master channel. I'll post a link below for reference. For the record, I really enjoy the majority of his videos, and I do suggest you check out his channel. However, in this case, to say that he and I disagree, that's an understatement. So let's look at his arguments. Argument 1. Speciesism makes no sense because you can't control how you are born. Understand that in his video he uses the word racism, but like I said, I'm going to use the word speciesism here because I don't want to conflate it with racism. So true, no one can control the nature of birth. But the premise of his comment is based on intraspecies racism, not interspecies speciesism. A jackal can't control the nature of its birth, but that doesn't mean the cheetah is going to try to understand it. The same is true for elves, dwarves, orcs, and other demi-humans and humanoids. Again, stop using 21st century human sensibilities when considering fantasy personified stereotypes. Diversity, open-mindedness, and understanding are stereotypical traits of being human. Maybe not with every single individual, which also speaks to our diversity as a species. But across the species as a whole, humans are the diverse species. And no, it's not up to us as game masters to remove speciesism from the game. Doing so means that playing elf is nothing more than wearing Spock ears. In that case, make your game universe all human and be done with it because else is just boring. Just playing a different look human. Hey, look at me. I'm a human with pointed ears. Oh, cool. I'm a short human that looks like a Duck Dynasty cast member. Ooh, I'm really interesting. I'm a human with horns and a tail. Stupid tieflings. It's up to us as game masters to exploit and enhance the broad stroke stereotypes of being demi-humans, to diversify within the scope of the broader stereotype. For example, one elf may see humans as a nuisance, but just isn't interested in confronting them. He may feel humans are as much a part of nature as a raccoon, and that he should coexist with us, just as he would with any other flora and fauna. Another elf may see humans as an affront to nature, and may desire to take action before all of nature is wiped out, and the earth becomes Coruscant from Star Wars. And another elf may truly desire to figure out these pesky humans, and in doing so, joins our society, or joins a player character adventuring troupe. Remember, elves are spontaneous, but they're also ancient. 1,000 years, 1,200 years, whatever the number is. There are near infinite possibilities, even while considering and remaining within the scope of the stereotypes. As a human, due to our diverse and versatile nature, it is easier for us to understand the elf and the dwarf, to reconcile their differences and even bridge the gap towards friendship. This is the advantage of being human, open-mindedness, and the willingness to interject ourselves where we are not always or initially wanted. Let's go back to the orc for a moment. An intellectually evolved or educated orc will not simply see the light and transform into a paladin or even a cultured diplomat. No, he's going to use that intelligence, wisdom, or education to become more efficient at war in order to show his strength and expand his territory. Intelligent orc isn't something to hope for, it's something to fear. Why? Because orcs, as demi-humans or humanoids, are by definition living stereotypes. They are their own character, in the modern world, meme. If you don't want to play a meme, be a human. Let's carry this even further. Listen to this clip from How to Be a Great Game Master.
And to make sure that the younger generations that are coming through don't get this idea that it's all right to say all orcs from Mordor only want to serve Sauron. What if there was a little rebellious group? What if there was a bunch who went, hang on, my lord, why do we need to hunt down hobbits? Surely we should be Looking at developing an agricultural base here in Mordor, we've got all this fertile soil. We certainly could start some vineyards and generate quite a nice wine. Mordor 347C. Oh, I think that could work quite nicely, actually. Then we could trade with the Gondorians, and certainly we know that the men of Bree like their ale, and, well, maybe we can open up a wine market there.
That orc, or group of like-minded orcs, are most likely crushed underfoot by the orc majority as a weakness, a cancer, or an aberration to the species, just as some animals commit infanticide to protect the genetics of the species, so would the orcs purge this genetic or mental defect. The other option is that a single orc, or perhaps a small number of orcs, escape. Maybe this orc even becomes a player character. No matter what, the life expectancy of said orc is low at best. Under normal circumstances, dwarves and humans would kill the orc outright. An elf could possibly leave it be, but even then, the orc would be walking on eggshells for the remainder of its life. And that's just the D&D setting. I don't think an elf would let it be in the Mordor setting, Middle-earth. Sure, a story can easily be developed where a human, maybe even a player character, was saved from drowning in a river by a free orc. And thus the human feels more open-minded and even protective of his savior orc. Just understand that without some special story, the orc would be unwanted and ostracized at best, and more probably hunted down and killed. There's a reason Dritz Do'Urden gets his own book series. He's the one anomaly that got away. Alright, let's look at discussion point or argument number 2.
Yes, it might be fun to have your dwarf have a racial enmity towards all orcs. Would that really still be as entertaining if you replace the word dwarf with Ku Klux Klan member, and instead of having a racial enmity of orcs, it's a racial enmity of Africans?
Really? How to Be a Great Game Master actually compared KKK and African Americans, he said Africans, to fantasy dwarves and orcs. Seriously? This is the most laughably absurd thought experiment I have ever that's a word, there we go. This is the most laughably absurd thought experiment I have ever heard on this topic. This guy should be ashamed of conflating fantasy demi-human speciesism with real-world racism. Now, if this YouTuber / Dungeon Master had made the same comparison using hill dwarves and mountain dwarves, he'd be a bit closer to a legitimate argument. But even that is injecting human sensibilities into a demi-human stereotype. As presented in those 17 seconds, he's conflating fantasy speciesism with real-world racism and is trying to change the orc genotype so it fits the human genotype. Stop it! It's not about physical appearance any more than judging a mountain lion's physical appearance in comparison to a beagle's. The physical appearance identifies the creature as what it is, an orc. The stereotype of an orc is an aggressive brute. Okay, one more. Let's watch argument number 3.
What we should be looking at is how to make those races as diversified, as interesting, and as amazing as the races that we have here on Earth.
Again, this is a silly comment. Demihumans are stereotypes. And lastly, in regard for the need for more diversity in the various species, look, if you cannot figure out how to make diverse and unique individuals within the broad stereotype and alignment, that's on you. What about the orc that conquers through brute strength? The orc that conquers through strength and guile? The aforementioned educated orc? The honorable Bushido Code orc who only attacks and conquers worthy combatants? The murderous ravager orc who kills anyone in his way? The peon, the sergeant orc, either at the bottom or stuck between the peon and his masters? The orc that leads from the front, leading the charge, or from the rear, beating any who fall behind? Those are just thought up on the fly. Give me an hour and I'll make you an interesting orc that fits within the stereotype. Explore the diversity of cultures and cities on Earth as an example of how to handle demi-humans in your fantasy world. Really? Diversity is the unique realm of humans, not demi-human species. Cultures and ethnicities within a race or on a landmass have nothing to do with the demi-human species of elf, orc, dwarf, gnome, halfling, etc. Let's look at elves again. There are high elves, gray elves, forest elves, sea elves, jungle elves, even arctic elves and mountain elves, not to mention dark elves and the underdark drow. Without digging too deeply into sociology, those differing subsets of elves are the demi-human equivalent of cultural diversity. Each has its own unique flavor, habitat, lifestyle, and so forth. However, there are still elves, as such, have the core instinctual need to live freely, spontaneously, and in harmony with their surroundings, even the drow. No amount of diversity can change this without destroying what makes them elves. All right, what are we at here? We're at 21 minutes. I could go on discussing metagame reasons for stereotyping, explaining tolerable exceptions to some certain stereotypes while still maintaining the overall broad brush stereotype and so forth. However, that would make this video over an hour because I've got many, many more points I can make. That would lead into race and class discussions. That would lead into alignment discussions. Yeah, I know a lot of you people out there don't like the alignment system. Well, you're wrong, and that'll be for another video. Ultimately, if you don't like demi-human stereotypes, just make everyone in the game human. Go ahead and feel superior with your 21st century human sensibilities. In the meantime, I'm going to challenge my players to roleplay their own character and individual diversity within the scope of the very broad stereotypes. All right, thank you very much. I know this segment is going to, at this point, has ruffled some feathers, especially people who play and enjoy the commie role-playing systems of 3rd, 4th, 5th edition D&D. Yes, I did just say that. Because don't get me started on dwarf wizards, gnome paladins, any tiefling, and so on. That will be an episode or 2 or 3 for another time. But I do sincerely look forward to your substantive and constructive comments and criticism or questions. I didn't actually type criticisms, but I'm saying it. Even if you disagree with me, hopefully you enjoyed my take on the subject matter and use it as food for thought. So please comment below, pound us on the Legion Myth Twitter, join us on our Discord, and subscribe to this channel. I hope you really do have a wonderful gaming day.